thought it was all supposed to be sorted out and stuff. But anyway, so 1984. What does it really say to you? I mean, what you know? There's what you've got a gig. You're head of lifestyle economics. You've written a lot of books about regulation of lifestyle. Something Orwell had a few bees in his bonnet about. So what is it in 1984 that really speaks to you? Why is it that you wrote the book, and presumably why is it that people here should reread the book 1984?
I think a lot of people get lots of different things out of 1984. I think it's a very well-written novel, just as a novel. He had a lot of time to think about this because it took several years. He was laid up in bed with tuberculosis, presumably thinking about every element of this. And you can tell that it's been really well thought out, in my opinion at least, because there's just, as with a lot of Orwell's best work, there just isn't a word out of place. There's no slack in it whatsoever. In fact, there's a moment when Julia and Winston are in their little room that they've hired out, and Orwell sees a rat, and he makes a big deal about this rat. And at the time, it's quite jarring because it's like, well, this is an extraneous piece of information. Obviously, it's very relevant later on. It needs to get in this fear of rats, something that Orwell shared, by the way. But at the time, because everything else is so tight, it feels like that's a bit of a strange thing to suddenly put in there. So it's very tightly written. I think pretty well written. I know some people say that the characters are a bit thinly drawn. I kind of disagree, actually. It's certainly compared to Brave New World, which is often compared to. I mean, it's 10 times a better novel than that, I think. And Brave New World is really just a bunch of silly jokes repeated again and again, in my view. So yeah, obviously people get a lot out of it. People see various things in it which were prophetic, of course, particularly things like video surveillance. What really interested me actually was trying to work out what Orwell was originally trying to say. And I know artists often say, well, you just get whatever you want out of it. But I was interested in what he was specifically trying to say. And again, he was trying to say lots of things. It was kind of the culmination of all sorts of thoughts that have been going through his head for 10, 15 years, ever since the Spanish Civil War. I think the main thing, if you had to summarize it in a few words, I think it's about objective truth and the war on objective truth. And that is only one reason why it has continued to appeal to people. But I think even more than the telly screens and some of the other stuff in there, which obviously was more pathetic than he probably could have imagined, because we have so much video surveillance now, and it's quite a kind of genius of him to even think of television as something that would watch people. Only 1 in 1,000 households even had a television when Orwell wrote the book, and CCTV barely really existed. But yeah, it's about objective truth, and he had this bee in his bonnet about this for many, many years. He was a journalist, and he should obviously be expected to take objective truth seriously, but he saw during the Spanish Civil War, he recounted that he would read reports about battles that had never happened, and there would be no reports about battles that actually had happened. He saw how people were literally being airbrushed out of history in the Soviet Union, and he found that, and he repeatedly said this, he said he found that more scary than anything else, more scary than the violence and the terrorism and the murders themselves, the idea that somebody can decide what the truth is, and no one will ever be able to disprove it, because once you've taken control of the present, you've taken control of the past, and that's it then. And this idea really terrified him. So there are so many of his little. He's got little bugbears in there. He's got really big concerns that he was writing about, and he brings them all together in this incredibly dense book. And the funny thing is, you can ignore all that. You don't need to know anything about his beef with the Stalinists or anything. You can just read it as a horror or a thriller, and probably many people do. So I think you can get a lot out of it, and people obviously do, which is why it's still so popular.
Yeah.